This is Beyond the Sidelines with Ethan Schmidt and George Belecci, only on 4stateshomepage.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into the very first ever Beyond the Sidelines. I am Ethan Schmidt. He is George Belecci, and I don't know if you guys can tell, but we're fired up for this new season.
That's right, Ethan, because it's finally here. It's around the corner. We're still counting down the days. Missouri high school football hasn't kicked off yet. KD game night hasn't started yet, but we're already talking football in the 4 states.
Exactly. Behind the Sidelines, if you will, that's the name of the show, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give you more of an insight of what's going on. Beyond the Sidelines. Did I say behind?
You said behind.
This is the first show. I even know the name that I created. I have to make sure that I remember the name that I created, so thank you for that. That's why George is here to correct me when I know that I'm making a mistake. That's what we're here for. We had the jamborees, though. We started off with a quick jamboree. We talked a little bit about it after Friday night, but just going a little bit of what you saw, maybe something that really surprised you. The biggest surprise, let's do it that way, your biggest surprise that you saw on Friday night.
It's not a surprise because it's what has won them championships, but Lamar's defense holding up against Webb City's offense. If you really want to go with surprise, Lamar throwing the ball.
Yes.
I'm not sure if we'll see that during the regular season. They may have just said, who cares, pin their ears back and let's show them something that'll surprise them. But the reality is that Duncan Gepner had a passing touchdown and down the seams as well. First 5 plays for Lamar, 2 touchdowns against Webb City's defense. I got to say that again. First 5 plays, 2 touchdowns. Lamar against Webb City's defense controlled the line of scrimmage. To me, that surprised it. It's not of what Lamar did. It's just doing that against Webb City. They impressed me a lot.
Absolutely. I agree with you there, George. It was crazy to see, and we'll talk about Duncan a little bit later on in the show. But we want to go first off. This show will be the week that we actually talk about our game of the week. We'll tell you what it is on Sunday night. So when you tune in to 4stateshomepage.com, you will know the game of the week before we talk about it on Monday or before we do our game of the week preview, of course, on Thursday nights. And our game of the week, if you can't tell, the 2 helmets that are sitting in front of us, it's been almost a yearly tradition to see these 2 teams now battling in the first game of the season, but Carl Junction, Webb City. We're fired up for it. Of course, we'll be there. As I said, game of the week, we'll be going live before the game. And we know that there's going to be a little bit of difference this year. We have a lot of graduated seniors from Webb City on that state championship team. And then in Carl Junction, we were expecting one man in particular to be back this season. And, of course, we lost him during the preseason with a torn ACL. And, again, best of wishes, and we hope for a speedy recovery for Raekwon. But, George, just talk a little bit about what you're expecting on Friday night.
Well, because this is the 3rd year in a row that Carl Junction will be opening up against Webb City. It's always a tough test because these are 2 of the best teams in Class 4, as it always gets to when it gets down to the playoffs. But the tough part is it's week 1. Everyone looks sloppy. I wish this was still a game we'd see in week 6, week 7. You know, we end up always seeing them later in the season in the district championship. But that's a part of it. Joe Kennedy, you know, he's already the man in the backfield. You know, he was the B to Raekwon's A if that offense, but now it's even going to fall more on his shoulders. And with Ray down, it looks like Tegan Armentrout is getting the start at running back. It'll still be by committee. We'll see Kobe Maxwell come out of there as well. And on Webb City, they returned the COC Offensive Player of the Year, first-team All-State running back in Durand Henderson. They returned one of the best 2-way players in the state, Alex Gaskell. And they also have Terrell Kabbalah back at corner. But Carl returns a lot, about 7 starters on defense, too. It's one of those games every week they open up, and it's one of the best showdowns, and it's just one of the best rivalries we get in the area.
And as you've already kind of given a little bit of a preseason look, we're going to talk a little bit about preseason teams here. And let's start with the Webb City Cardinals. You talked about 2 of the best returners in the area, being Durand Henderson and Alex Gaskell. Alex Gaskell, one of the best 2-way players, as you mentioned. The guy can go up for the ball. If you did not see the state championship game against Ladue Horton Watkins, that was the dagger, was that interception that he caught to towards the end of the game. It eventually set up some big plays and just really deflated Ladue Horton Watkins in that game. It was a big momentum swing, of course, and we know that both these players had the potential. Durand does it anytime that he touches the ball, he gets an open space. It doesn't matter if he's 20 yards away, 80 yards away. You got to catch the guy, because if you don't, he's in the end zone.
Yeah, because Alex Gaskell is one of the most athletic guys you'll see in the secondary, one of the most athletic guys you'll see at wide receiver, and he's put on weight this year. He's carrying it well. He was about 180 last season. He looks like he's 210, 215, and split out wide. They still give him the ball in space, or he could, you know, do a simple fade route, or he could go the length of the field, as he did against Carl Junction last season in week 1. And with Durand, he's that player that in the biggest games, the biggest moments, he steps up. Against Ladue Horton Watkins, what was it, 291 rushing yards.
Yes.
He had about 38 carries in that game and a score. But Webb City went out, played their defense, shut out an offense that scored 36 points per game, and they led it with their running game. What I'm concerned about, and it goes back to the defense, 9 all-COC defenders were on that defense last year. They returned 2. One of them will be playing quarterback, so I won't expect to see him at linebacker. But if the linebacking core, Jordan Rogers and Javis Berlin in the middle, And then on outside linebacker as well, another first-team All-COC. And then Cade Beeson was a second-team All-Conference outside linebacker. But at quarterback, so they don't return any of those guys. Alex Gaskell back in the secondary. Terrell Kabala back from a torn ACL. So they're healthy again, but it's just the inexperience. 5 returning starters total for Webb City. So it'll be interesting what we see from the Cardinals
And that
this
was
year.
pretty much my question marks as well, is that defensive identity. What's it going to look like? Then Cade Beeson, how do you get him some time? How do you get him in there to be able to do that? And then not to mention, even with that, you have to realize, how's this team going to respond to the adversity that they face as well? That's a huge one for me, because with adversity, you never know what's going to happen with this team, because as you mentioned, so many guys graduating. Let's move on, though. The other team in this one is Carl Junction. When we talk about Carl Junction, you talk about a guy by the name of Joe Kennedy, and he's pretty much, as you've said early on, last year, this year he's going to have to be almost the heartbeat for this team, because this team is going to have to come in and replace one of the best players in the state. You know, in our area, in our region, in Raekwon Weston, he's going to have to do even more than what he had to do last year. So we're going to see what Carl Junction does this year.
And yeah, and with Joe Kennedy, it's, you know, he's one of the most underrated players, I think, in the state, one of the most underrated athletes, period, not just quarterback. But he does return 2 starters up front in Matt Hosp and Cooper Cook, and he had over 3,100 yards of offense last season. You know, I said with Ray going down, you know, Joe Kennedy has to, you know, be the lifeline of this offense now, and that's what you expect. Doug Buckmaster is is an offensive genius in the area, and he's not going to ever throw out a vanilla game plan. And even though it's week 1, it's going to be tough against Webb City, he still has something special planned for Carl Junction. Defensively, what's going to be tough is they do return 7 starters on their defense. They still lose Levi Dooley, who's now playing over at Missouri Southern. They lose Zeke Wall, who's at Pittsburgh State.
Yes.
And Raekwon Weston, that's a Division I outside linebacker. That's an all-conference outside linebacker. That's a Division I athlete there. So we'll see what they do. I'm interested in, I mentioned him as a running back. Tegan Armentrout started at free safety last year as a sophomore, earned that black jersey. We'll see how he does now this upcoming season as a junior.
And one of my biggest question marks on this season, George, and you're going to agree with me, is can they get past Webb City? That's been almost the dagger for them. If you look at last year, they had 2 losses, the week 1 against Webb City, and then in the district finals. That was the 2 losses that they faced last year. So you have to wonder, that's the biggest question mark. Can they finally do it?
It's 5 straight years they've lost in the district championship, Carl Junction. And it's a tough hump to overcome. I mean, if you want to say there is a year to do it, it could be with how inexperienced Webb City is coming into this year. But you don't, you know, with John Roderick, 11 state championships doesn't just happen. It's not all about having the right senior class every year. It's about the culture there. And, you know, from week 1 to week 9, from week 1 to the state championship, it's never the same team. That's how it goes for dynasties like you have with the Cardinals. So that's tough. To call it now, I'm not going to be that brash yet.
Not there. Not yet. Not yet. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. We'll make some predictions in a few of the games that we're looking at. But let's keep going in the COC.
Yeah.
We won't come to the newcomer yet. I know a lot of people are like, oh, what about Joplin? Not yet. Not yet. Hold up 1 second. We're going to talk about the Carthage Tigers, because that was another team. They lost in the semifinals last year to Staley, and it's just a team that's coming back with probably one of the best pure passing quarterbacks in the area, and Zeke Sappington. And you got to talk to Zeke earlier this week. You got a chance to meet up with him, and you said he looks even bigger and even more ready to go this season as well. Talk a little bit about Carthage.
You could tell that Zeke took the offseason very seriously, because he put on the weight. He walks up to you, and you see how important this is to him. His junior year, he was kind of not along for the ride, but that's what it seemed like. He was happy to be there. He was happy to be the starting quarterback of Carthage as a junior. He's embraced the leadership role as a senior now. When I talk to him, you see tap into his IQ a little bit. He's preparing himself not only for this year, but he's how he is preparing for games, preparing for in the off season, and hitting the weight room as if to play college ball, as if he's already at that level. And you talk to him too, he sounds like a coach, not just a quarterback. And he said it to me, and I told him it was one of the best things I heard was 2 people can never have a bad day on the practice field, him and head coach John Guidey. And that's what Zeke is embodying. It'll be big to see how he does without Arkell Smith out wide. Jaden Morgan's going to fill that void. He's one of the best athletes. He's also an all-conference corner as well, so it'll help out on the defensive side too. And Carthage, what is a big part too is Clay Newman and Dylan Lancaster are no longer in that backfield. We'll see. They still haven't settled yet, and maybe by committee. We'll see how that goes. But for Carthage, they also return Andrew Rainey up front, Colton Winder at the middle linebacker position. they have the experience where you want it in this conference.
Absolutely. My only other question mark that I had for them is, can they finally get past some of those big boys in the COC and actually maybe take that? I mean, they've lost Ozark to start their seasons back-to-back years. Of course, then Webb City was another loss for them. They rattled off a few wins. Then Carl Junction, they lost there and then rattled off wins to get to the semifinals.
It's funny because I think Carthage, it's become, a trend they don't like, but they have won their district, I think, 4 straight years, but they've also lost the opening game of the season, maybe 4 straight years as well, I believe. So it's just they can't get out to that slow start. But like you mentioned, are they going to be the team that opens up 0-2 on the season, or are they going to be the team that won, per se, 9 of their last 11 to close out the season, and also have that run through districts and into a team like Staley in the Final Four of Missouri High School?
And with a guy like Zeke Sappington, there's a good possibility that they just come out and do what they can do and throw the ball and just makes him, as every favorite quarterback I've ever had, you just got to make players out of the people around you, and I think that's what they'll aim for. Now let's move on. The name that people are really looking forward to seeing in the COC this year, it's Joplin, and that team, of course, led in by a junior quarterback in Blake Tash, and probably one of the best receivers in the area, and he would probably tell you that he is the best receiver in the area, and Zach Westmoreland. And when you watch him and you see him in the game, you kind of have to agree with him. When you watch what he can do on the field, he is quick, he's big, he's powerful, he can go up, he can make plays, and we'll see him playing both sides of the ball this year a little bit too. That's
right, and you're right, because Blake Tash, it's funny because last year at the Jamboree, Jake Flowers was taking snaps at quarterback, and then a week later, Blake Tash is on the scene and owns it. What I want to see from Blake Tash is the improvement. In the offseason, watching him, he makes all the throws. It's a cliche to say, but he has improved. It's just, can he make those reads? Does he lock on to guys and look and stare down Zach Westmoreland, or can he spread the ball out a little more? Zach's, one of his teammates, James Moman, he was on the scene at the Jamboree this past Friday night, and he showed up because I've heard a lot about him in the offseason, and we see that there is another receiver on that roster too. And then they have Isaiah Davis in the backfield. He kind of had to take over because of some players not filling their role, and he had good production at the end of the season. Same thing, as I said, with Zeke Sappington. Isaiah Davis seemed to live in the weight room. He's up at like 215, 220 pounds. Good luck to defenses trying to tackle him. And they have 4 of their 5 starting linemen are seniors. That's great. So you have the perfect balance. It's experience, it's junior leadership, senior leadership, and then defensively, like you said, my biggest question mark was the secondary. Zach Westmoreland, the athlete that he is, will be playing safety for the Eagles. It's a big boost for them.
My biggest question mark coming into this, though, I think the biggest thing that I really want to know is how they adjust to the COC. That's what I really want to know. What's that adjustment going to be like? Because these are a lot of teams that, yes, they face the Kickapoos and they face those teams from Springfield, but there's a little bit of difference when you're taking on Webb City and Carl Junction, and you're taking on Carthage, and you're actually getting those guys who grind out every single week against, and for years against each other. So I think the biggest thing for me is what's that adjustment going to be like? And then also, for the first time in a long time, and actually I talked to Coach Jasper about this during the offseason, one of the biggest things that Joplin will have to focus on is now they're going to have a few packed houses that they've never seen before. I mean, both sides of Jung are going to be filled. You're going to have a lot more noise than you're used to because you're going to have Webb City who travels well, Carthage who travels well, Carl Junction travels well, Neosho will bring a crowd. I mean, you're going to have a lot of good teams who are close, can make those drives now, so Jung's going to be packed on Friday nights.
Yeah, and I go back, it's the first time Joplin will be playing Webb since 1997, and just how the parity is in the COC. 2 years ago in Webb's down year, they lost to Carl Junction and Carthage. Last season, you just mentioned it, Carthage lost to Webb City and Carl Junction, and they lost to Staley in the playoffs. Carl's lone 2 losses last year was to Webb City, so we know who the kings are of the COC. There's nothing new there. For Joplin coming onto the scene, well, they're going to be introduced right away. They have to go on the road to start out in the conference at Willard week 2 against Webb City, and it's not Lebanon, it's not Waynesville. These are the real deal, and these are some of the best athletes in the area. When you go to the all-conference teams, there's a lot of Carl Junction in there, a lot of Webb City, and a lot of Tigers of Carthage on there too.
Absolutely.
What I give Joplin is they have the confidence. They're not going to go out there bright-eyed and scared. They want to hit people in the mouth. They want to prove themselves right away. But there's always, you could have confidence, but are you really ready? And we will see.
And speaking of a team that likes to go out, hit people in the mouth, and let them know that, yeah, we might be smaller than you, but we are 7-time consecutive state champions in Class 2. Let's move to the Big 8, and let's talk about the kings of the Big 8. Let's talk about the kings of Class 2. in the Lamar Tigers, and Coach Scott Bailey bringing back Duncan Gepner, who we talked about a little bit as a quarterback and what we've seen from him from the Jamboree. One of our favorite players, of course, Trevor Medlin, who had 2 amazing runs in the state championship, and a guy by the name of Travis Bailey, who
best linebacker in the area.
He is absolutely grown. We've seen him; he looks bigger, and I think Lamar, they're fired up to come in this season as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned because Duncan Gepner is back there. You know, we're going to see the mullet for another season at quarterback, and he looked comfortable. And for Travis Bailey at the linebacker position, he was, you know, holding his own with Webb City, making plays all over the field. What Lamar brings back is just, you know, it's the same thing. They find a way to reload with a Class 2 program, which is really difficult to do. But there will be sophomores having serious time. There will be juniors playing serious time, and there'll be seniors. What impressed me the most, you rolled up to Jung Stadium. You saw 3 300-pound linemen up front for the Tigers. Where they got them, they grew them. They're corn-fed boys. That's the definition of corn-fed, in my opinion. You see the offensive line. We'll see how they can move. And, you know, there is that constant pressure, whether they want to admit it or not, of, you know, 7 straight state titles, also the country's longest winning streak of 49 straight games. So you see how Lamar does with that. But from all goes at Jung Stadium, they looked good. They did get shut out against Joplin, but that's Class 2 against Class 6. Right. Joplin better shut them out.
Right, and Lamar will come up and they'll start off against Logan Rogersville. That's be a nice little trip for them. We'll talk a little bit more about that during predictions later on. But let's move on a little bit quicker here. Let's go on to Seneca. Seneca 9-2 in 2017. They return a guy by the name of Gavin Klaus under center. He is a very poised young man. He's very nice when you talk to him, a great student of the game. And, of course, he'll have a running back that'll be with him by the name of Trey Wilson. Yeah. 2 very explosive players. If you looked at Gavin last year, he kind of sprouted on the scene, and you were just like, all right, this kid has the intangibles to be a very good quarterback. Not only was it through the air, but also on the ground as well.
Yeah, Ryan McFarland, what he's done entering his 3rd season, 3 wins his first year, 9 last season. And then 2, you mentioned Gavin Klaus, Trey Wilson. That's, I think, 2,700 yards of Seneca's offense last season, and accounting for, you know, over 30 touchdowns between the 2 of them. They get it done between the 2 of them. We'll see how they can do, because they did run into, you know, the guys that ran the table and another Big 8 squad in Mount Vernon in the playoffs. That Mount Vernon team went on to be a Class 3 runner-up. Let's see how Seneca can do it this year. Good expectations. They return good spot guys up front as well. The defense, to me, was their strong suit, so I'm interested to see how they do there as well.
And you just talked about Mount Vernon. That's another team that we're looking at, of course, Mount Vernon being one of those teams that went to the state tournament last year, made it all the way to the state final, ended up losing that state final, have a lot of players replaced, but they do return a guy by the name of Will Boswell, who, might you argue as well, could be the best linebacker in this area and probably the best defensive player in the area because of just what he does. Definitely the best defensive player in Class 3, hands down. You got to give him that. With his career tackle numbers being through the roof, the guy is a ball hawk, but he's also got a nose for the ball at linebacker. And so Mount Vernon will come in this season. They're replacing a lot of good guys. They're replacing Ty Boswell at quarterback, Andrew Montemayor, probably one of the most elusive players that we saw last year. Sammy Robinson as well, but Mount Vernon's going to have to come in. And for me, the biggest question mark for them is how are they going to build off of last year with a lot of people and a lot of new faces.
They lose 11 all-district seniors. They lose 10 of their 11 starting defenders. Will Boswell's the sole one that returns. They do come into the new Big 8, you know, so they will be in that conference. They still uphold their rivalry with Aurora. They will be playing them. It's just to mimic what they did last season is tough. But what I do see in them, what they had the experience of last year, was losses down the road, because they ended the season with 3 straight losses, and one of those coming to Seneca, they had that bounce back. One of those coming to Aurora, they had that bounce back against Aurora as well. So they know what that's like. But to mimic last season, to me, there's too many losses there, Ethan.
Right, and one of the teams now that you've told me a little about during the offseason here, you've talked about them a little bit, is Cassville. They have a lot of returning starters. You said this might be a Cassville team that we've never seen before.
15 returning starters, 18 seniors. Shannon Haney, who started halfway through his freshman year, is taking over the helm too. They got a lot of pieces there that Lance Parnell is working with in Cassville. They're kind of always that team that they should be good this year, but they never really put it together. But I'm interested to see how they do it this upcoming season.
Let's move on. Southwest Conference is a new conference. Well, not a new conference. People in the area, of course, know the conference, but it has new teams in it. And one of those teams being Pierce City. Coach Brad Hawker, one of those guys who we know that will come out there and make sure his team is fired up, ready to go every week. Of course, they return Trey Sagehorn, and they do return another Clybaker. And I was told when I went to Pierce City, there is an even younger Clybaker coming up. So there will be another Clybaker coming up. We know the twin brothers last year graduating, of course, Dallas and Donald. But now we come back in. We have Jackson Clybaker at receiver. We have Trey Sagehorn, who's probably one of the most elusive backs in Class 1 that we'll see. Pierce City coming in this year. They're both of our favorites, really, in the Southwest Conference.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a no-brainer. It's interesting because Southwest Conference, something we weren't expecting with the reclassifications, thought it'd be all Class 1. Sarcoxy got booted up to Class 2. They're coming off losing Chris Comerford. But with the Pierce City Eagles, you said Trey Sagehorn, they have another Clybaker there. And, you know, Coach Hocker, he's going to be candid with you, what the key is for the season. They just want to be healthy. He has the guys he needs in certain spots. We'll just see how they do the season. That's going to be a interesting conference to watch just because we don't really know who's going to emerge out of that. Last season, it seemed like Pierce City would surefire be the favorites as they were, but this upcoming season. And, I mean, they went undefeated during the regular season. They lost in the district finals. Can they get over that hump, too? That's another team.
Absolutely. End of the season, big matchup with Sarcoxy. Both those teams ready to go at that time, so a great little rivalry is there. Let's go into Kansas now. Let's start in the CNC, and the team that everybody's predicted the team to beat, Bo Sarwinski's Galena Bulldogs, and Galena will come back with J.C. Shelton. He was our countdown to kickoff guy today for 5 days out, but he's got a really good backfield behind him. They're looking to replace a lot of offensive linemen, though, and a lot of experience that they had up there.
Yeah.
A guy by the name of Trevor Little was one that comes to mind when you think of some of those big hogs they had up front, both offensive and defensive linemen that they're going to have to replace. But J.C. Shelton, he's one of our best athletes really in the area.
Because he's a quarterback you won't see often, will return punts for the Bulldogs, and Joseph Helton's back, Cooper Lawson, and they also lose Garrett Hall, who is just one of the tallest receivers in the CNC and would just go up and ball hawk. Kind of look like a Plaxico Burris out there for the Galena Bulldogs, Plaxico in his prime. That's what interests me. They have the experience back just up front. That's so much to lose. And was the timing last year for a good team? It could have been with all the skill guys they had complemented by that offensive line. That's a lot for them to overcome. But still, Galena, they were picked to come out of the CNC, and I do agree with that pick. I see that happening.
And, of course, Columbus will have a few players to replace. Ridge Smith, Keenan Stanley were two very good athletes in the area. They'll have to have some replacement there as well. Coach Grundy's squad, they'll have to figure out who's going to be in those roles, who's going to take those spots, and who's going to step up. And when you spoke to him actually at the media day that they held, he said the biggest thing that he saw was players were willing to leave skill positions to play offensive line. Not many kids do that. Not many kids, if you're going to be told, hey, you're going to go from getting the ball and being that star to having to, block a huge guy in front of you, not many people will do that. And he said that was probably the biggest thing that he saw from his team.
That's what I'm interested in. I want to find out what they're feeding them boys, that they got, running backs the size of linemen, but it's selflessness, and that's what you need in programs like that. And so for Columbus, it's tough to tell. They're the program that you don't know what you got until it's a few weeks into the season. You can tell. To me, Keenan Stanley was just one of the best running backs in the area, so that's going to be the tough part to overcome. And he showed up against Galena. He almost led that comeback against Galena single-handedly, but Galena ended up getting the upper hand 33-29 last season, late into the season. So Columbus, it's a lot to overcome. We'll see how they do there.
And, of course, Frontenac was a team that made it to the state championship last year and lost in the state championship game. But one of the biggest things about Frontenac, I talked to Coach Mark Smith. He said, we don't have a lot of people returning. We have a lot that we have to replace. We have a lot of guys. But he said the thing that he loved the most, and one of the things that you have to love as a coach, is competition. And when you think of competition, you have competition at every position right now at Frontenac, and he said that's what he hopes his team is able to build off of.
Yeah, and you got to replace Peyton Brown, you got to replace Jake Wilbert and Brock Ginnivan too. So that's a lot, but Mark Smith, he was a part of state championships during his playing days. He understands what it's like to have that reloading session too, and to fill guys in the voids. And he's a smart, heady coach too. So I'm interested to see how Frontenac pans out.
In the SEK, of course, Labette County, kind of the chosen team there, the Grizzlies. They come in with 6'2" Easton Dean. He's already committed to Iowa State. He committed back in February as a junior, now in his senior year. When we spoke to Easton Dean, one of the biggest things that he had to say about it is he hopes that he can just continue to get better as a player. And when you're hearing a guy who's 6'7", he's already committed, and you hear that he says, I'm not ready yet. I still need to get better myself. I'm banking that I can continue to grow. Maybe not size-wise grow, but just grow as a quarterback. Last year, he not only was he able to throw the ball so well, but he was able to run the ball as well, and he was hoping that he got more athletic during the offseason. That's what he talked about. He's like, I'm hoping my athleticism grows. When you got a guy at 6'7" running at you, a guy over 200 pounds, 6'7" running at you, that's intimidating to a defensive back.
Yeah, and he's the quarterback that raised a lot of eyebrows when he got that offer from Iowa State. He's kind of the typical, passes the eye test. Now, his senior season, can he show that he does deserve that offer, that he is the real deal? You asked me last season, Chase Curtis was the best quarterback in Southeast Kansas in the area altogether. So can Easton Dean kind of take that over? And week 1 for Labette County, they open up at Pittsburgh High, who has one of the best returning defenses in the area. So that's going to be a great matchup to see. And that, that's 2 weeks away, 2 Fridays away.
We got some other schools in Kansas. You just mentioned Pittsburgh. That's going to be a big thing. Defense is big. Of course, they lose Chase Curtis, but they do return Dylan White. So that'll be a team that's very much got a target on them as well.
If you bring in a new quarterback, D. White's a great guy to have outside. And then defensively, Jarek Butcher on the inside, Dylan Jordan on the outside, Joel Kafka at safety. 3 returning starters there defensively. And Jarek's going to be the quarterback. Dylan Jordan, maybe the best athlete on that team, one of the best athletes in the area. He's going to be a real hellraiser, coming off the pass rush there outside. And that's what they're licking their chops at. Week 1 against Labette County, they have Easton Dean. What I love about Pittsburgh, and it's the 3rd year we're seeing it, Tom Nicholson sending them out on an independent schedule. Because again, Blue Valley North with an Elite 11 quarterback returning 6A state champions. They have 5A schools in DeSoto. And he's just going to continually have those tests. He wants his guys to be as prepared for the postseason as possible. And they're one of the biggest schools, or the biggest school in 4A with the reclassification. They dropped down.
Absolutely. And then, of course, another team, we talked about St. Mary's Colgan and Sean Seamatter coming off another state championship appearance, just could not get it in the end. But, of course, St. Mary's Colgan, they're going to return a lot of good players as well. And that team from last year, there's several returners that we're going to see again.
It was just beyond impressive to see what they accomplished last year with Coach Seamatter, what he did. You see that's kind of what the system can do. They play they have the recipe. Play defense, have a quarterback that won't lose you the game, but run the heck out of the ball and really win it that way, grind it. And that's what they did, so we'll see how they return again.
We'll look at some of the preseason players, and we've mentioned some of those guys, top quarterbacks in the area. Of course, we'll have every week we always have our top performer. It'll air on Monday nights at 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock on your KODE newscast, so you'll get a chance to see who we saw in those weeks and who we have that could actually do and was the top performer in our area. Some of the quarterbacks we're looking at, we've already mentioned some of them: Joe Kennedy, Zeke Sappington, Blake Tash, Duncan Gepner, J.C. Shelton, Gavin Klaus, Easton Dean. Those are the guys that we're really looking at to see kind of coming into the preseason. Those are the names that we talked about and we thought of. Coming into this, you've mentioned Joe Kennedy, you feel, is going to be the heartbeat for this team in Carl Junction. And he's more than likely, as you said, one of the best players in this area. What do you think, out of those names that we mentioned, who are you looking forward to see what they're able to do?
Zeke Sappington, just because I want to see what he can accomplish without Arkell Smith, what he will do with Jaden Morgan. But to me, it's just, and I said eye test for Easton Dean. Zeke Sappington checks off that box for there. He's about 6'4", so maybe he can be a few inches taller, but he's just a smart guy, and I love the offense that he's in because it's a pistol, but he could run. He had over 500 yards on the ground last season to complement his passing game, too. I just think he makes the biggest jump. On top of that, Blake Tash, because how do you do now against these COC defenses? We talked about his receivers. The corners they'll be going up against will be really difficult to handle as well.
And we're looking at a few running backs as well. The name that's going to come out the most, the top running back in the area, Duran Henderson, hands down right now. We would have had I think you and I would have had a little bit of an argument, Raekwon and Duran in the beginning of the year, who we're going to look at. Those are the two guys, that would look at it. And of course, Duran now, the guy that we're looking at as the main running back in the area. Some other guys we're looking at: Isaiah Davis, as you mentioned, from Joplin. Chris Ibarra from Commerce. We saw one of the best plays I've ever seen from a running back, knocking down about a 300-pound lineman on a run and stood like he had never lost a step. Trey Sagehorn, of course, and then the Galena backfield as well, as you mentioned, Joseph Helton, and of course Cooper Lawson. Out of those running backs, obviously we know Duran. Anybody else you're looking at this season that you think might be one of those guys we keep talking about?
I've looked at Isaiah Davis because he has everything he needs around him. Full off season, know he's going to be the running back, the offensive line up front. And what those guys, all you of them listed was, Ibarra, you listed, he knocked over a lineman. What Durant has done, Isaiah did. Trey Sagehorn, they did it for a long period of the season. And then also, you might see Kobe Maxwell of Carl Junction emerge and Tegan Armentrout. They're going to be by committee, but how do they answer to that? Have they put the work in the offseason to be a two-way starter and be a running back in Doug Buckmaster Masters offense. But not trying to sound like the smartest guy in the room, I just want to see Durant Henderson run. It's also big because he has to overcome losing 3 All-COC linemen, including Landon Beebe, a D1 lineman, last season. The system's great there in Webb City. The assignments are always sound, so we'll see how they do. And he, against that Lamar defense I was speaking so highly of, scored twice against them.
Absolutely. And we talk now receivers, Zach Westmoreland from Joplin, Alex Gaskell from Webb City, Terrell Kabbalah now back from the torn ACL. We'll see what he can do. Dylan White, of course, from Pittsburgh. And, of course, one of my guys, Jackson Clybaker from Pierce City. I feel we watched a little bit in practice. He looked good. He was getting up, catching balls, things like that. Out of your receivers, who are you looking forward to seeing what they can do?
Terrell Kabbalah on the comeback, Alex Gaskell with how he carries his weight, and then Zach Westmoreland just to see him go. As I mentioned, the corners will be going up against Webb City. He'll see TK and he'll see Alex Gaskell over the top two. What Joplin does with James Moman now on the other side, you're going to have 2 safeties back with those 2 guys, I believe. You're going to stretch out the defense. Then you got to still respect Isaiah Davis in the middle of the field. And then also Dylan White, because he just bursted onto the scene. One of the best athletes on the outside. Can he build the same chemistry with his quarterback this season as he had with Chase Curtis last year?
And, of course, Dylan White, I have to give a shout-out to the OVC, getting a look from SEMO. Not my favorite team, of course, in the OVC. That's, of course, Austin Peay, but we'll get that to another day. But, of course, already getting a look from Division I FCS school in SEMO. We'll see what he gets towards the end of the year as well, because I'm excited to see if one Division I school is looking at him, who else is going to come in and start talking to him. Top defenses, Pittsburgh, of course, returns a lot. They have 21 seniors on this year's squad after losing a handful as well last year, maybe 2 handfuls last year of seniors, still replacing that. Of course, Lamar, we see you talked about Travis Bailey early on, another good defense. Webb City, we'll see what they can do. That's normally one of the top defenses in the area. Carthage as well. Mount Vernon, what defense do you think is going to have to overcome maybe more, or who do you think is going to be a standout defense?
Overcome the most by far has to be, I mean, you can go either way, but Mount Vernon and Webb City with just the losses they had of amount of starters. And all those guys, because what Webb City lost, we saw, Jordan Rogers at Pitt State, Elijah Robinson at Pittsburgh State too, Javis Berlin now at Missouri Southern. So guys that could go on and play, college football. And for me, just the one to watch will just be Pittsburgh, because also the tests they have. They open up against Easton Dean, week 3 against Blue Valley North. They're going to have to go, and they're going to have to set the tone, and they're going to have to be the lifeblood of that team. It'll be the same thing with Carl Junction. They're going to have to be the tone setters. That's what Carl Junction is going to hang their hat on, is their defense. We'll see how they respond to that responsibility.
So now we have a special part of this, what we're talking about. We're going to be doing predictions. We're going to be competing. It'll be, of course, you and I competing. I don't know what we're competing for, but we're just competing. That's what sports guys like to do. We like to compete. Andy Searcy is going to be a part of that. We will have, of course, also along with Andy Searcy, we'll have Hank Rotten Jr. and Eric Kinnett. And, of course, you'll find Hank and Eric's predictions on Fridays during the morning shows on KSN, our sister station. You'll get a chance to see who Hank and who Eric have picked. You'll get to see who we pick. For Game of the Week, we're going to tweet them out Friday morning, because we have a little bit riding on that, and that's our Game of the Week. We'll be at those areas, so we want to make sure we give that the power and the feeling of we're going to be there. We want to know. So our Game of the Week predictions we won't make yet. Everybody else will. We'll do it Friday morning. But let's start off. Our first prediction that we're going to do, Joplin at Willard. It's their first COC Large Division test. I have Joplin taking this one. I think it's going to be an easy beginning for them, but maybe a good warm-up before going against Webb City.
Yeah, they heard, what I've said, what I like about Joplin. Same thing. Willard, to me, is just not ready for that yet.
Our next game that we have, Mount Vernon. We talked about what they did this year. They're going to be hosting Monette. Monette got pulled up to Class 4 this year during the adjustments in the classification. So Mount Vernon, again, I'm going to go with Mount Vernon. I'm going with the guys that were in the Class 3 state championship last year. So we'll see what Mount Vernon is able to do, but that's who I have predicted in that one.
I just see it's a tough first week for Mount Vernon's defense to open up against Monette's offense. I'll take the Cubs on that.
I love it. Let's go Lamar at Logan Rogersville. Win number 50 in a row. I'm calling it. Lamar beating Logan Rogersville on the road. We were very impressed in the Jamboree. They're coming out throwing. We might not even see that, but they have the athletes. They have the big guys up front now. I'm going with Lamar in that game.
Brotherhood. I'm going with the Brotherhood.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. Pierce City versus Lockwood. Pierce City, we talked about that. Lockwood had a longer run in Class 1 last year, if you remember. Yeah. They were in the semifinals before falling right before the state championship game. So Lockwood had made it almost there. And Pierce City, of course, the kind of the surprise loss to Thayer. Not many people thought it was going to happen. Starting off this season, I'm going to go with Lockwood in this one. I know Coach Hocker and the crew that's coming out there, and I've spoke so high about them, but I think Lockwood has a little bit of they want to prove some stuff coming out in this week.
They returned Paxton Masterson, who's a great quarterback, but I'm going to go with Pierce City Eagles. I just believe in what Brad Hocker has established there down in Pierce City.
And that's actually going to bring us to the next portion in this, and it's kind of a big portion of this because it's the Sports Swami. He's talking to us. He told us his predictions. Of course, the Sports Swami, the guy who'd been here for several years, was the sports director at KOD before I got here, and a guy by the name of Andy Searcy. And Andy, what are your predictions for this week? Let's see what he's got. Andy, who do you have? Andy's taken Webb City, Joplin, Mount Vernon, Lamar, and Pierce City. That's what Andy had to say for this week. That's what he wanted. So Andy Searcy, the Sports Swami here in the 4 states area. As I mentioned, Andy's going to be making his predictions every week. He said he might even come in. I don't know. I think the head might. That's what people want to see, right, George?
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so that's Andy's predictions for week 1. He's taking Webb City in our game of the week. As I mentioned, our game of the week we'll predict those. Myself and George Belecci will pick those on Friday night. One of the other things that we like to do is you never want to go out unprepared for a Friday night game night. So you want to make sure if you're going to the game of the week or you're just going out in the 4 states, who do you have and who do you turn to for your weather forecast? Well, we always turn to Ray Foreman. So let's see what Ray Foreman has ready for us on Friday.
Well, hey guys, thanks for letting me be a part of the program here. And I am a team player, so I don't mind coming in on the weekend. Now, as far as our rain, we are looking at some showers probably during the daytime Friday, but that should clear up before game time. Headed into Friday night, it's still going to be warm, thinking probably middle 80s to start the game, and then probably lower 70s by the end of the game. But we should be dry through that period. I think we will still have some cloud cover around. Once again, thanks for letting me come in, guys.
And that is Ray's predictions, what it's going to be on Friday night. He's not making sports predictions. I don't think he would want to do that. But, of course, Ray Foreman helping us out on Friday nights for where you guys are going to be going out. And, George, as we mentioned, game of the week, Carl Junction, Webb City. We'll be tweeting out our predictions of this game, of course, on Friday morning. But just one last thought. What are you excited for most in this game of the week?
Just for football to be back, Ethan. You know, we've been waiting for it. And I love because in June, people are coming up to me saying, are you ready for football to be here yet? And I'm like, I can't wait. I know mid-September I'm going to be crossing my fingers for December. But in reality, it's the best time of year. It's what brought us here to the 4 states, and it's what everyone lives on. That's why I'm really excited also for this show. I guess I'll say that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah,
for us to do this every Sunday night, get together and talk football, because how important it is. They deserve more than Friday night, which is what they get and what they deserve, the guys that put their go all out every Friday night.
Absolutely, George. And we want to thank, of course, everybody who came out and donated to our set, all the athletic directors, all the coaches. We appreciate it so much. We could not be doing this without your help. We love talking about your teams. Thank you so much for letting us do that as well. And, of course, thank you to Ray Foreman for coming in on a Sunday to talk a little bit about weather for us. And, of course, Andy Searcy making a prediction as well on the day. But, of course, again, thank you guys so much for tuning in to the first ever Beyond the Sidelines. I am Ethan Schmidt. He is George Belecci. You'll catch this every Sunday on 4stateshomepage.com.
This is Beyond the Sidelines with Ethan Schmidt and George Belecci, only on 4stateshomepage.com.